The Upanishads are a collection of texts that contain some of the central philosophical concepts of Hinduism, some of which are shared with Buddhism and Jainism. The Upanishads are considered by Hindus to contain utterances concerning the nature of ultimate reality and describing the character of and path to human salvation. The Upanishads are commonly referred to as Vedānta, variously interpreted to mean either the last chapters, parts of the Veda, or the object, the highest purpose of the Veda. The concepts of Brahman and Ātman are central ideas in all the Upanishads, and know your Atman, the thematic focus. The Upanishads are the foundation of Hindu philosophical thought and its diverse traditions. Of the Vedic corpus, they alone are widely known, and the central ideas of the Upanishads are at the spiritual core of Hindus. More than 200 Upanishads are known, of which the first dozen or so are the oldest and most important and are referred to as the principal or main Upanishads. The Mukhya Upanishads are found mostly in the concluding part of the Brahmanas and are Aranyakas and were, for centuries, memorized by each generation and passed down orally. The early Upanishads all predate the Common Era, 5 of them in all likelihood pre-Buddhist, down to the Maurya period. Of the remainder, some 95 Upanishads are part of the Mukhya canon, composed from about the last centuries of 1st millennium BCE through about 15th century CE. New Upanishads, beyond the 108 in the Mukhya canon, continued to be composed through the early modern and modern era, though often dealing with subjects which are unconnected to the Vedas. Along with the Bhagavad Gita and the Brahma Sutra, the Mukhya Upanishads provide a foundation for the several later schools of Vedanta, among them, 2 influential monistic schools of Hinduism. With the translation of the Upanishads in the early 19th century, they also started to attract attention from a Western audience. Arthur Schopenhauer was deeply impressed by the Upanishads and called it the production of the highest human wisdom. The 19th century transcendentalists noted the influence of the Upanishads in Western philosophy. Etymology. The Sanskrit term Upanishad translates to sitting at the feet of, referring to the student sitting down near the teacher while receiving esoteric knowledge. Munir-Williams' Sanskrit dictionary adds that, according to native authorities, Upanishad means setting to rest ignorance by revealing the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit. Sri Adi Shankara explains in his commentary on the Katha and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that the word means Atmavidya, that is, knowledge of the self, or Brahmavidya, knowledge of Brahma. Other dictionary meanings include esoteric doctrine and secret doctrine. The word appears in the verses of many Upanishads, such as the 4th verse of the 13th volume in 1st chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad. Max Muller as well as Paul Dersin translate the word Upanishad in these verses as secret doctrine. Robert Hume translates it as mystic meaning, while Patrick Olivelle translates it as hidden connections, development, authorship. The authorship of most Upanishads is uncertain and unknown. Radhakrishnan states, almost all the early literature of India was anonymous. We do not know the names of the authors of the Upanishads. The various philosophical theories in the early Upanishads have been attributed to famous sages such as Yajnavalkya, Uddalaka, Aruni, Shvetaketu, Chandalya, Aitareya, Valaki, Pipalada and Sanat Kumara. Women, such as Maitri and Gargi, participate in the dialogues and are also credited in the early Upanishads. There are exceptions to the anonymous tradition of the Upanishads and other Vedic literature. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad, for example, includes closing credits to sage Shvetashvatara, and he is considered the author of the Upanishad. Scholars believe that early Upanishads were interpolated and expanded over time. Because of the differences within manuscripts of the same Upanishad discovered in different parts of South Asia, differences in non-Sanskrit version of the text that have survived, and differences within each text in terms of the meter, the style, the grammar and the structure. The text as they exist now is believed to be the work of many authors. Chronology scholars are uncertain about the exact centuries in which the Upanishads were composed. The chronology of the early Upanishads is difficult to resolve, states philosopher and Sanskritist Stephen Phillips, because all opinions rest on scanty evidence and analysis of archaism, style and repetitions across texts, and are driven by assumptions about likely evolution of ideas, and presumptions about which philosophy might have influenced which other Indian philosophies. Indologist Patrick Olivelle says that, in spite of claims made by some, in reality, any dating of these documents that attempts a precision closer than a few centuries is as stable as a house of cards. Some scholars have sought to analyze similarities between Hindu Upanishads and Buddhist literature to establish chronology for the Upanishads. Patrick Olivelle gives the following chronology for the early Upanishads, also called the principal Upanishads. The Brihadaranyaka and the Chandogya are the two earliest Upanishads. They are edited texts, some of whose sources are much older than others. The two texts are pre-Buddhist. They may be placed in the 7th to 6th centuries BCE, give or take a century or so. The three other early prose Upanishads, Taittiriya, Aitareya, and Kaushitaki, come next. All are probably pre-Buddhist and can be assigned to the 6th to 5th centuries BCE. The Kanna is the oldest of the verse Upanishads, followed by probably the Katha, Isa, Svetasvatara, and Mundaka. All these Upanishads were composed probably in the last few centuries BCE. The two late prose Upanishads, the Prashna and the Mandukya, cannot be much older than the beginning of the Common Era. Stephen Phillips places the early Upanishads in the 800 to 300 BCE range. He summarizes the current Indological opinion to be that the Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, Isha, Taittiriya, Aitareya, Kanna, Katha, Mundaka, and Prashna Upanishads are all pre-Buddhist and pre-Jain, while Svetasvatara and Mandukya overlap with the earliest Buddhist and Jain literature. The later Upanishads, numbering about 95, also called minor Upanishads, are dated from the late 1st millennium BCE to mid-2nd millennium CE. Gavin Flood dates many of the 20 Yoga Upanishads to be probably from the 100 BCE to 300 CE period. Patrick Olivelle and other scholars date 7 of the 20 Sannyasa Upanishads to likely have been complete sometime between the last centuries of the 1st millennium BCE to 300 CE. About half of the Sannyasa Upanishads were likely composed in 14th to 15th century CE. Geography. The general area of the composition of the early Upanishads was northern India, the region bounded on the west by the upper Indus Valley, on the east by lower Ganges region, on the north by the Himalayan foothills, and on the south by the Vindhya mountain range. There is confidence about the early Upanishads being the product of the geographical center of ancient Brahmanism, comprising the regions of Kuru Panchala and Kosala Vedānta together with the areas immediately to the south and west of these. This region covers modern Bihar, Nepal, Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, eastern Rajasthan and northern Madhya Pradesh. While significant attempts have been made recently to identify the exact locations of the individual Upanishads, the results are tentative. Witzel identifies the center of activity in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad as the area of Vedānta, whose king, Janaka, features prominently in the Upanishad. The Chandogya Upanishad was probably composed in a more western than an eastern location in Indian subcontinent, possibly somewhere in the western region of the Kuru Panchala country. Compared to the principal Upanishads, the new Upanishads recorded in the Muktika belong to an entirely different region, probably southern India, and are considerably relatively recent. In 4th chapter of the Kaushitaki Upanishad, a location named Kashi is mentioned. Classification: Muktika Canon, Major and Minor Upanishads. There are more than 200 known Upanishads, one of which, Muktika Upanishad, predates 1656 CE and contains a list of 108 canonical Upanishads, including itself as the last. The earliest ones, such as the Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishads, date to the early centuries of the 1st millennium BCE, and the latest to around the mid-2nd millennium CE, during a period of Islamic invasions and political instability. Various scholars include the earliest 10, 11, 12 or 13 Upanishads as Makira principal Upanishads, all composed in the 1st millennium BCE. The remainder 95 to 98 are called minor Upanishads, and were likely composed between the last centuries of the 1st millennium BCE and about mid-2nd millennium CE. These are further divided into Upanishads associated with Shaktism, Sannyasa, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Yoga, and Samanya. Some of the Upanishads are categorized as sectarian, since they present their ideas through particular god or goddess of a specific Hindu tradition, such as Vishnu, Shiva, Shakti, or a combination of these, such as the Skanda Upanishad. These traditions sought to link the texts as Vedic by asserting the text to be an Upanishad, thereby rooting most of these sectarian Upanishads, for example the Rudrahridaya Upanishad and the Mahanarajana Upanishad, assert that all the Hindu gods and goddesses are the same, all an aspect and manifestation of Brahman, the Vedic concept for metaphysical ultimate reality before and after the creation of the universe. Muktika Upanishads. The Muktika Upanishads can be grouped into periods. Of the early periods of the Brihadaranyaka and the Chandogya, the oldest, the Aitareya, Kaushitaki and Taittiriya Upanishads may date to as early as the mid-1st millennium BCE, while the remnant date from between roughly the 4th to 1st centuries BCE, roughly contemporary with the earliest portions of the Sanskrit epics. It is alleged that the Aitareya, Taittiriya, Kaushitaki, Mundaka, Prashna, and Katha Upanishads show Buddha's influence, and must have been composed after the 5th century BCE, but it could just as easily have been the other way around. It is also alleged that in the first 2 centuries AD, they were followed by the Kena, Mandukya and Isa Upanishads, but other scholars date these earlier. Not much is known about the authors except for those, like Yajnavalkya and Uddalaka, mentioned in the texts. A few women discussants, such as Gargi and Maitri, the wife of Yajnavalkya, also feature occasionally. Each of the principal Upanishads can be associated with one of the schools of exegesis of the 4 Vedas. Many shakas are said to have existed, of which only a few remain. The new Upanishads often have little relation to the Vedic corpus and have not been cited or commented upon by any great Vedanta philosopher. The language differs from that of the classic Upanishads, being less subtle and more formalized. As a result, they are not difficult to comprehend for the modern reader. The Kaushitaki and Maitrayani Upanishads are sometimes added to the list of the Muktika Upanishads. New Upanishads. There is no fixed list of the Upanishads as newer ones, beyond the Muktika anthology of 108 Upanishads, have continued to be discovered and composed. In 1908, for example, 4 previously unknown Upanishads were discovered in newly found manuscripts, and these were named Bhaskala, Chargalya, Arshaya and Saunika by Friedrich Schrader, who attributed them to the first prose period of the Upanishads. The text of 3, the Chargalya, Arshaya and Saunika, were incomplete and inconsistent, likely poorly maintained or corrupted. Ancient Upanishads have long enjoyed a revered position in Hindu traditions, and authors of numerous sectarian texts have tried to benefit from this reputation by naming the texts as Upanishads. These new Upanishads, number in the hundreds, cover diverse range of topics from physiology to renunciation to sectarian theories. They were composed between the last centuries of the first millennium BCE through the early modern era, while over 24 of the minor Upanishads are dated to pre-3rd century CE. Many of these new texts under the title of Upanishads originated in the first half of the 2nd millennium CE. They are not Vedic texts, and some do not deal with themes found in the Vedic Upanishads. The main Shakta Upanishads, for example, mostly discuss doctrinal and interpretative differences between the 2 principal sects of a major tantric form of Shaktism called Srividya, Upasana. The many extant lists of authentic Shakta Upanishads vary, reflecting the sect of the compilers, so that they yield no evidence of their location in tantric tradition, impeding correct interpretation. The tantra content of these texts also weaken its identity as an Upanishad for non-tantrikas. Sectarian texts such as these do not enjoy status as Shruti, and thus the authority of the new Upanishads as scripture is not accepted in Hinduism. Association with Vedas. All Upanishads are associated with one of the 4 Vedas: Rigveda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. During the modern era, the ancient Upanishads that were embedded texts in the Vedas were detached from the Brahmana and Aranyaka layers of Vedic text, compiled into separate texts, and these were then gathered into anthologies of Upanishads. These lists associated each Upanishad with one of the 4 Vedas. Many such lists exist, and these lists are inconsistent across India in terms of which Upanishads are included and how the newer Upanishads are assigned to the ancient Vedas. In South India, the collected list based on Muktika Upanishad and published in Telugu language became the most common by the 19th century, and this is a list of 108 Upanishads. In North India, a list of 52 Upanishads has been most common. The Muktika Upanishads list of 108 Upanishads groups the first 13 as Mukhya, 21 as Samanya Vedanta, 20 as Sannyasa, 14 as Vaishnava, 12 as Shaiva, 8 as Shakta, and 20 as Yoga. The 108 Upanishads as recorded in the Muktika are shown in the table below. The Muktika Upanishads are the most important and highlighted. Philosophy. The Upanishadic age was characterized by a pluralism of worldviews. While some Upanishads have been deemed monistic, others, including the Katha Upanishad, are dualistic. The Maitri is one of the Upanishads that inclines more toward dualism, thus grounding classical Samkhya and Yoga schools of Hinduism, in contrast to the non-dualistic Upanishads at the foundation of its Vedanta school. They contain a plurality of ideas. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan states that the Upanishads have dominated Indian philosophy, religion and life ever since their appearance. The Upanishads are respected not because they are considered revealed, but because they present spiritual ideas that are inspiring. The Upanishads are treatises on Brahman knowledge, that is, knowledge of ultimate hidden reality, and the presentation of philosophy presented presumes. It is by a strictly personal effort that one can reach the truth. In the Upanishads, states Radha Krishnan, knowledge as a means to freedom, and philosophy as the pursuit of wisdom by way of life. The Upanishads include sections on philosophical theories that have been at the foundation of Indian traditions. For example, the Chandogya Upanishad includes one of the earliest known declaration of ahimsa as an ethical precept. Discussion of other ethical premises such as Dhamma, Satya, Dana, Arjava, Daya and others are found in the oldest Upanishads and many later Upanishads. Similarly, the karma doctrine is presented in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is the oldest Upanishad. Development of thought. While the hymns of the Vedas emphasize rituals and the Brahmanas serve as a liturgical manual for those Vedic rituals, the spirit of the Upanishads is inherently opposed to ritual. The older Upanishads launch attacks of increasing intensity on the ritual. Anyone who worships a divinity other than the self is called a domestic animal of the gods in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The Chandogya Upanishad parodies those who indulge in the acts of sacrifice by comparing them with a procession of dogs chanting Om. Let's eat. Om. Let's drink. The Kaushitaki Upanishad asserts that external rituals such as Agnihotram offered in the morning and in the evening must be replaced with inner Agnihotram, the ritual of introspection, and that not rituals but knowledge should be one's pursuit. The Mundaka Upanishad declares how man has been called upon, promised benefits for, scared into and misled into performing sacrifices, oblations and pious works. Mundaka thereafter asserts this is foolish and frail by those who encourage it and those who follow it, because it makes no difference to man's current life and afterlife. It is like blind men leading the blind. It is a mark of conceit and vain knowledge, ignorant inertia like that of children, a futile, useless practice. The Maitri Upanishad states, the performance of all the sacrifices, described in the Maitrayana Brahmana, is to lead up in the end to a knowledge of Brahman, to prepare a man for meditation. Therefore, let such man, after he has laid those fires, meditate on the self, to become complete and perfect. The opposition to the ritual is not explicit in the oldest Upanishads. On occasions, the Upanishads extend the task of the Aranyakas by making the ritual allegorical and giving it a philosophical meaning. For example, the Brihadaranyaka interprets the practice of horse sacrifice or Ashvamedha allegorically. It states that the overlordship of the earth may be acquired by sacrificing a horse. It then goes on to say that spiritual autonomy can only be achieved by renouncing the universe which is conceived in the image of a horse. In similar fashion, Vedic gods such as the Agni, Aditya, Indra, Rudra, Vishnu's Brahma and others become equated in the Upanishads to the supreme, immortal and incorporeal Brahman Ātman of the Upanishads. God becomes synonymous with self and is declared to be everywhere, inmost being of each human being and within every living creature. The one reality or Ekam Sat of the Vedas becomes the Ekam Evaradvitiyum, the one and only, and stands as second in the Upanishads. Brahman and Ātman and self-realization develops in the Upanishad as the means to moksha. According to Jayutilaki, the thinkers of Upanishadic texts can be grouped into two categories. One group, which includes early Upanishads along with some middle and late Upanishads, were composed by metaphysicians who used rational arguments and empirical experience to formulate the speculations and philosophical premises. The second group includes many middle and later Upanishads, where their authors professed theories based based on yoga and personal experiences. Yoga philosophy and practice adds utterances, bullshit not entirely absent in the early Upanishads. The development of thought in these Upanishadic theories contrasted with Buddhism, since the Upanishadic inquiry assumed there is a soul, while Buddhism assumed there is no soul, states utterances. Brahman and Ātman, two concepts that are of paramount importance in the Upanishads, are Brahman and Ātman. The Brahman is the ultimate reality, and the Ātman is individual self. Brahman is the material, efficient, formal and final cause of all that exists. It is the pervasive, genderless, infinite, eternal truth and bliss which does not change, yet is the cause of all changes. Brahman is the infinite source, fabric, core and destiny of all existence, both manifested and unmanifested, the formless infinite substratum and from which the universe has grown. Brahman in Hinduism, states Paul Dayson, as the creative principle which lies realized in the whole world. The word Ātman means the inner self, the soul, the immortal spirit in an individual and all living beings, including animals and trees. Ātman is a central idea in all the Upanishads, and know your Ātman, the thematic focus. These texts state that the inmost core of every person is not the body, nor the mind, nor the ego, but Ātman, soul, or self. Ātman is the spiritual essence in all creatures, the real innermost essential being. It is eternal, it is ageless. Ātman is that which one is at the deepest level of one's existence. Ātman is the predominantly discussed topic in the Upanishads, but they express two distinct, somewhat divergent themes. Some state that Brahman is identical with Ātman, while others state Ātman is part of Brahman but not identical. This ancient debate flowered into various dual, non-dual theories in Hinduism. The Brahma Sutra by Badarayana synthesized and unified these somewhat conflicting theories, stating that Ātman and Brahman are different in some respects, particularly during the state of ignorance. But at the deepest level and in the state of self-realization, Ātman and Brahman are identical, non-different. The idea put forth by the Upanishadic seers that Ātman and Brahman are one and the same is one of the greatest contributions made to the thought of the world. Allusion to different types of the non-dual Brahman Ātman are presented in the Upanishads, according to Mahadevan, the one in which the non-dual Brahman Ātman is the all-inclusive ground of the universe, and another in which empirical, changing universe is a form of Maya, often translated as illusion. The Upanishads describe the universe and the human experience as an interplay of Purusha and Prakriti. The former manifests itself as Ātman, and the latter as Maya. The Upanishads refer to the knowledge of Ātman as true knowledge, and the knowledge of Maya as not true knowledge. Hendrik Vroom explains, the term Maya has been translated as illusion, but then it does not concern normal illusion. Here, illusion does not mean that the world is not real and simply a figment of the human imagination. Maya means that the world is not as it seems. The world that one experiences is misleading as far as its true nature is concerned. Quote, according to Wendy Doniger, to say that the universe is an illusion is not to say that it is unreal, it is to say, instead, that it is not what it seems to be, that it is something constantly being made. Maya not only deceives people about the things they think they know, more basically, it limits the knowledge. In the Upanishads, Maya is the perceived changing reality, and it coexists with Brahman, which is the hidden true reality. Maya, or illusion, is an important idea in the Upanishads, because the texts assert that in the human pursuit of blissful and liberating self-knowledge, it is Maya which obscures, confuses and distracts an individual.